So I'm here to talk about Pakistan today, which is, some part of Pakistan is in Central Asia. And of course, Pakistan is located at the confluence of three regions. That is South Asia, Central Asia, and the Middle East. It's a beautiful country. Some of these images that you'll see, they might amaze you. We have some of the most fascinating mountains in the world, some of the largest glaciers in the world. When people think of Pakistan, they always think of Pakistan as a warm country. Of course, it is a warm country in most parts of its south, and probably central Punjab and central Sindh as well. But the north of Pakistan is, it's fairly cold. It's mountainous, and then, of course, in the very south, we have the Arabian Sea, where you find a beautiful, beautiful coastline. But despite all that, where I'd like to start about Pakistan is from its fascinating history. When we talk about history of the world, there are three ancient civilizations which started it all. And one of those three, and perhaps as per some of the most recent research, the oldest, was the Indus Valley civilization. People here might have heard of places like Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. These are world-famous archaeological sites which depict how modern those civilizations, that particular civilization was for its times. In fact, there's been a lot of work done on those sites by our German friends as well, amongst other European friends. Some have devoted their entire lives to that because, there's so much to discover there. A lot of excavation has taken place. Mohenjo-daro is almost a city, it is, and so well developed that even like 7,000-8,000 years back, they had some sort of a drainage, for those times. They had some sort of running water. So that's where it all started. And then again, recently they found out that besides Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, there are archaeological sites in Balochistan, in a place called Mehergarh. So that civilization is even older than what we found in Harappa and Mohenjo-daro. So from there, the Indian civilization, and that was again, in fact, one of the first civilizations which started the use of textiles, for instance. In many ways, it actually inspired the human evolution fast forward. And from there on, we moved to the few thousand years later. Somehow, these the early Indus Valley civilization, particularly these two, the Harappa and Mohenjo-daro, these two clusters, they somehow got, suddenly they obliterated in terms of their human existence there. There are various theories on that. But the civilization itself carried on. There was the Vedic period a few thousand years later, then the Hindu period, basically the religion developed from there. From there, eventually, from within the Hinduism, originated the Buddhist period. And Hinduism and Buddhism spread from there, in fact, from what is today Pakistan to all over Asia. Many parts of Asia, you still have Hinduism. Of course, India is the biggest example, but it's not just limited to India. It's even in countries like Malaysia, or many other Far Eastern countries as well, and as well as many South Asian countries, which are mostly, in many ways, a mix of Hindus and Muslims. Then again, the Buddhism, it spread as far as Japan, all the way to the eastern end of the continent. Subsequent to that, we had some other cultural influences. For instance, the famous Alexander the Great, he invaded India, and we still find some remnants of the Greek civilization in some parts of Pakistan and India. Following that, we had, again, many, many cultural invasions. In those times, the cultural invasions used to come with actual military invasions as well sometimes, or through the traders, with the famous Silk Road, which is now being revived by China. It all it started from China, but it passed through what is Pakistan onward to Central Asia and to Europe. From there on, then we have the Muslim period, which starts, more than 1,000 years back. Started with Muhammad bin Qasim's invasion. It's called by some, or Muhammad Qasim's, coming to South Asia. Then there were invasions from Central Asia. There were some of those Turkic sultans, who established the Sultanate in Delhi. This went on for hundreds of years. Eventually, we had the Mughals, that glorious period of 200 or 300 years, where you had, and that is, in fact, I still remember one of my Indian friends when I was studying in the US, he would say, if we talk about the history of India, and he's a very nationalist, person, he's become a very famous person now, actually, is the history of the Mughal period in many ways. Because that is where the arts and culture and in trade and science and and as you know, algebra started from started by Muslims, but it was spread then by the Muslims coming to India and other parts of the world. Zero originated in India and what is Pakistan today. From the Mughal period onwards, then we find the colonial period. First, because India, this whole regions of South Asia was then popularly called India or Hind. So in that region, which was one of the richest regions in the world, in fact, some of you who are into economics would probably know there was a study, a kind of retrospective study of the world, which discovered that for the last 2,000 years, there were two big economies in the world for 95% of this time, or 90% of this time. And that was India and China. But then when starting from the late 18th century, then Britain became, first Spain and then Britain became the British Empire, the biggest economies of the world, and China and India, they diminished in their importance as economic power. In any case, they were colonized or semi-colonized. From that period onwards, of course, there were the 200 years or 150 years of British period. And we in Pakistan have some very beautiful buildings from that colonial era. That colonial era left its marks as well. Some very kind of well-known universities in Pakistan were set up, like Punjab University, for instance. It was one of the oldest in South Asia. In South Asia, was set up in that period. And then in 1947, of South Asia, or what was the British India, got its independence, and then it was divided in two countries. And from there starts the the modern history of Pakistan, so to speak. And from there on, of course, that wondrous journey of cultural evolution and arts and music and fascinating tradition, that has there was a bit of a divergence. See, because there was a lot of commonalities in terms of many of these cultural traditions amongst what is today India, Pakistan, and Bangladesh. But then 47 was a point of divergence where the Pakistani arts and literature and music. It evolved in a slightly different variant. And in India, of course, because they wanted to Sanskritize it a bit, and there was some effort to move it closer to sort of, to some Hindu traditions. So it moved, the two traditions moved a little further apart. But even today, Pakistani music has some fascinating facets. For instance, Qawwali. Qawwali is something which was sort of, a genre of music which was started 500 or 600 years ago by the, famous Amir Khusro. And it has evolved in a fascinating tradition, which even, by the way, has a lot of fans in Germany as well. Your foreign secretary, the state secretary here, is a great ardent fan of Qawwali. We've had many Qawwali's functions here. Similarly, Ghazal is another tradition of music, a beautiful tradition of music, which has blossomed so much in Pakistan. Then even in India, it was very interesting. At one point in India, some of the most famous singers would say, like for example, I think some of you might have heard of Lata Mangeshkar, a world famous singer. She used to say that the world listens to my music. I mean, in terms of course, the Indian, Pakistani diaspora all over the world, and of course, India itself is a huge country in South Asia. But I listen to Pakistani ghazals. I listen to Mehdi Hassan, for example, a great ghazal singer. Similarly, many other ghazal singers from Pakistan are famous in not just South Asia, but all over the world in many ways. Then if we talk of arts, painting, for instance. So there were the very famous Sadkain and Chughtai, who used to excel in Mughal miniatures. If we talk about sports, then again, cricket is something which is common between, India and Pakistan. And both the countries have excelled in it, like winning various World Cups as well. Then if we talk about sort of, literature, Pakistan and India both produced fascinating literature. In fact, it's almost become a new genre. Literature in English as well. I think in the last year's Berlin Literary Festival, there were 3 or 4 authors from Pakistan who were invited, amongst all those sort of globally acclaimed authors, and this year as well. So whatever we sort of talk about, fashion, for instance, there's such a vibrant scene of fashion in Pakistan. I always, tell my German friends, and they're surprised sometimes, that there are more fashion shows and fashion weeks in Pakistan than perhaps you have in Germany. So all that sort of, the cultural and historical milieu is there. Because tourism is not something which is just about some buildings or some sort of, some natural sceneries or landscapes. Tourism is about culture, arts, cuisine. And again, if you talk about Pakistani cuisine, it's world famous. In fact, in many countries, although it's called Indian cuisine outside Pakistan, because South Asian, Indian Pakistani cuisines are similar as well. And the interesting part is that wherever you go in the world, and if you go to a restaurant which is called the so-called the Indian restaurant, when you go there, most of the things that you find, most of the cuisine you find there has meat in it. But that's not really typical Hindu tradition, because Hindus are primarily vegetarians, although some have now kind of evolved a bit, but Hinduism is, is about vegetarianism as well. So I think from the perspective of tourism, let's see now. There was a time, and I remember when I was growing up, I was a child of 6, 7, or 8, or 10. I used to see in Pakistan, in cities like Lahore, that's my hometown, like thousands and thousands of tourists from all over the world, particularly European and American tourists. And most of them, a lot of them were hippies, those are the times of the hippie trail. The hippie trail was all about Afghanistan and then to Pakistan and India and sort of, Nepal, all these countries. Pakistan was a big part of the hippie trail. But unfortunately, ever since we had the Afghan war, the Russian invasion of Afghanistan in 1979, following that, the whole region has been so tumultuous. And unfortunately, while the war ended, first in 1989, the Russians went back. But then the civil war continued, and and then of course there was 9/11, and then the Americans came in, and still, even to this day, that has continued. And that created a lot of terrorism as well in the region. And Pakistan was a big victim of terrorism for many, many years. And that diminished some of that tourism, which we had in the 50s and the 60s and the 70s. But I think in more recent times, now that terrorism has subsided in Pakistan, we have contained it, at the cost of thousands of lives. We've had some of the most challenging military operations against the terrorists, and very successful ones at that. Now is the time. Look at this truck here. It's very interesting. If, Pakistan is probably the only country in the world where all these trucks that you see, they're full of artwork. In fact, a new genre of art has been inspired from that, called the truck art, which you see now everywhere in the world. In fact, even if you visit the Pakistan embassy here, we have some truck art paints there. That shows. And by the way, this truck art started in the northern region of Pakistan. That's where people thought people are very kind of, very martial, where you have those some of those, we had some of those radicals as well, and some of those, even the Taliban that we were pitted against, come from that region. But those people, although on the one hand they are considered very jingoistic, or at least very, very much like the cowboys of the of the bygone era of the Wild West, but they also have this very, very intense artistic sensibility, which manifests itself in things like truck art, or even in their in the dress, the traditional couture, and in the cuisine as well, very, very rich cuisine. Now, what you've been seeing here, probably we've seen a lot of mountains and valleys, and that is the north of Pakistan. And as you can see, some of these mountains are very high. In fact, we have 8 of the top 20 mountains in the world. K2, the second tallest in the world, and then of course the 5th tallest, the 6th tallest, like Nanga Parbat and Rakaposhi, and That is the very famous Khyber Pass that you saw. In Khyber Pass, the one before that, why it's a world famous thing. A lot of international global icons, or global leaders, when they visit Pakistan, they want to visit Khyber Pass. Why? Because in the ancient times, all the invaders whoever wanted to invade India, and India was very, very lucrative, like in those times, because it was one of the richest countries of the world. They had to basically come through the Khyber Pass. That was the gateway to the South, what is South Asia today, and what was called subcontinent, or India. But at the same time, this is Karachi, of course, in the south. We don't just have mountains. We have some beautiful, fascinating cities as well, like my city, Lahore. It has such rich history, like from the Mughal period, from the the Sultan's period, even before that, even a lot of faith tourism is possible there, because you have some of the Buddhist ruins as well, some of the Hindu period architecture there as well. In Karachi, which is not as old as Lahore, you find a lot of buildings from the colonial times, like during the British times. Then again, it's very fascinating that On the north, you have all these beautiful mountains and valleys, and some of that are just absolutely gorgeous, probably because of their sheer the sheer heights that you see. They're majestic. That's the term used by a lot of foreign tourists who go there. Because let me draw a comparison here. The highest peak in Europe is Mont Blanc, and the height of that highest peak in Europe is almost the height of a road that we have, a road between, which basically passes, from it's from China to Pakistan and then onwards. And K2 and all those very high peaks that we have in Pakistan, they're literally thousands of meters higher than the peaks that you have here. Similarly, I've been to those regions. When you go there, you're just astounded by the, by the contrast that you find there. By the, like the majestic mountains, the very deep valleys, and everything's, it seems that, like in Europe, for instance, you go to Switzerland, which is very beautiful. But the mountains and the valleys, everything, it seems like it's compared to the north of Pakistan, it seems that in some sort of a miniature of that, I don't know if some of you have read Gulliver's Travels. So it's like the Lilliputians, or the sort of, in terms of the size of the mountains and the valleys and everything. So the scale is very different. And probably you don't find anything like that anywhere in the world. People who have been there from Germany, many of them I've known, they just say that, once you visit that, then nothing compares to that. But that is just one of the facets of tourism in Pakistan. The other facet, of course, the history that you find in many, many cities, or like places like Mohenjo-daro and Harappa, and all those sort of, and some of the fortresses, like you can just find just by when you're traveling from one city to another. Once I was traveling from Lahore to Islamabad, and on the way somebody said, there's a fort, would you like to visit that? And I said, yeah, sure. We went to that fort, basically the fortress called Caucasus. And then we discovered that, that started, like it was improved upon in different historical eras. But originally, it was like 3,000 years old. Amazing history. And that's not the only site. You would find those sites literally everywhere, like scattered in Pakistan. There's so much to discover there, so much to explore. And in the cities themselves, these big cities like Lahore is like now 11 million, Karachi's 17, 18 million, and but then there are smaller cities as well. Some of those cities are very unique in many ways, in Sindh, for instance, or in Balochistan. For example, this one, very pertinent, the city of Saints, Multan. In terms of population, it's almost as big as Berlin. But the history goes back to thousands of years there. And some of those buildings still exist there. There's so much to see there. This is Islamabad. Islamabad is a very modern city. And if you see the layout, again, a few kilometers from, like for example, from my house in Islamabad, if I just walk a few kilometers, I would be up in the mountains, And from there, some of the views of the city are just gorgeous. Then there's a beautiful lake around it as well. Literally because the city is like, it's like a valley. And very interesting. Islamabad in the summer can be very hot. The temperature, let's say, sometimes could be like 40 or 45. But then you just drive 45 minutes from Islamabad and you'll go to a place called Murree, a very beautiful hill station where the temperature would be like 22 or 25, like within 45 minutes, such a huge change of temperature. And the landscape would be totally different and beautiful, Even Islamabad has a beautiful landscape. But the thing is, because Islamabad is actually in some ways the starting point of where, the heights start increasing. Then for those who are interested in sort of, in water, beaches, Pakistan has a beautiful coastline. Karachi has some very nice beaches like this one, for instance. And you would always find these very fancy sort of camels there. Some of the very famous pictures of camel rides, like Jackie Onassis, when she came to Pakistan, she had a camel ride, and she really loved it. And some American presidents themselves as well, they came and, In fact, there was one person, what we call a sarban, a camel rider. So I think it was probably Lyndon Johnson. He came to Pakistan, and he went for a camel ride, and he became a friend with that person, and he actually invited him to the U.S. There are very interesting histories there. But again, along the coast of coastline of Balochistan, there's some fascinating, pristine virgin beaches where, literally there's nobody there. The water is just literally, it's like a lagoon. And the sea life is just amazing. I mean, we still have to develop some of those, but with this development of this port of Gowada, that has started happening. So the point is, in today's world, for a tourist, I mean, in some ways, the tourism itself has become so commercial, so mundane. Any city that you go to would literally have, other than a few buildings, the same places, the same McDonald's, the same KFC. I mean, even the museums have become now, literally, museums even in London and some in Berlin are probably still more traditional. You go to some museums, it seems like if you're literally going, in a Disney park, the way they take you everywhere and sort of, everything is becoming like that, literally. You go to a place, you see on TripAdvisor, okay, tuck, these are 6 places that I have to visit, and okay, move on. And the food is literally, the traditional food is also kind of, like the traditional food of that place is also kind of literally, it's been commercialized to the extent there's no authenticity anymore, literally, these global chains. The coffee everywhere is Starbucks. Even in Italy now, I hear that Starbucks is going to open up stores there. So the point is, in today's world, tourism in some aspects has lost its luster. Luster in the sense that there's nothing to really explore, like in the olden times, where tourism actually meant that you would see some things that others wouldn't have seen. Now, you go to places, most of the sort of, the hot tourist places, and they're literally like, they're just like Disney parks. You have to do this and sort of, there's 10 places, and there's open roof buses who would sort of, like give you a guided tour and everything. Okay, it's nice. But for the genuine tourist, somebody who's really interested in exploring something fascinating, something real, something which is original, authentic, Pakistan is an amazing place. And that is why we call it the best kept tourist secret in the world. And I have no doubt in my mind, there was a time that, there were places like Spain and France and all those sort of, and then suddenly people discovered, because, after this fall of Cold War, fall of the Berlin War and end of Cold War, that there's this place called Croatia, which not many people in the Western Europe or the, North America had seen. And they suddenly discovered this beautiful country. And it was great. And then they discovered some other, people, Budapest, for instance. Now it's become so commercialized. But initially, after the fall of the wall and, the end of the Cold War, when people saw the city for the first time from Western Europe, they were very pleasantly surprised, because these are beautiful cities. Kiev, for instance, or, like St. Petersburg, such a fascinating city, but people in the West didn't really have the chance to go there. But now what has happened is, more and more of those cities have sort of, or the countries have been not just kind of, brought back in the fold of that international consumerism, but they have become literally hackneyed destinations of tourism. And now they're always trying to discover more now, finding new places in Africa, sometimes as far as, South Pacific, they're always trying to discover something new. So in that way, I have no doubt in my mind that in the coming years, Pakistan will become one of the hottest tourist destinations in the world. But it's before that. I've forgotten my glasses. Okay. Well, I see you better now. Okay. Okay. Okay, no, I'm just kidding. I could see pretty well otherwise. Okay. Okay. But I can make you see Pakistan better, definitely, Okay. So I have no doubt in my mind that in coming years, Pakistan would be discovered for its fascinating history, for its wondrous culture, for its very rich traditions, amazing cuisine, for its faith tourism, for its glorious mountains, and above all, I think, for its friendliest people, one of the friendliest in the world, I would say. Because people who go to Pakistan, there are a lot of things which really, I'm talking about people that I've known in many, many countries where I've been. People have one very stereotypical image of Pakistan, based on what they get from media and everything. But once they visit Pakistan, it just kind of, it's all shattered. And then they have a very different image of Pakistan. But when you ask them what is the thing that you most liked about Pakistan or which really surprised you the most, many would say the people, extremely warm and friendly, warm like like by warm-blooded like the Latinos, let's say, or the Mediterraneans here in Europe. You happy about it? Okay, great. I see some excitement here. Okay, but also very friendly and and very curious. It's easy to make friends there. It's easy to get help if needed. It's easy to gel in the crowd. Because in Pakistan, again, that's another fascinating aspect of Pakistan. There has been so much mixing in Pakistan over the last 3,000 years that, of course, I would gel in the crowd there, but even Mark Donfried, for instance, if you'd be wearing a shalwar kameez and he goes to Peshawar, you'd just gel in the crowd there. And any of you, literally, because the north of Pakistan, people are much light, they're lighter skin, they are kind of light eyes, they're in the south of Pakistan, they're people more like me, or even anybody could really gel in the crowd there, a lot of people speak English, all educated people there speak very good English, and everybody literally on the street would speak some basic English, so that's not even a problem as well. And then they're always willing to to make you feel at home and make you a part of whatever they are doing. For example, if there's something which is on the street, some sports going on or whatever, and it actually happens in Pakistan, by the way. Sometimes you'll find people playing cricket on the streets, and you want to play, no, nobody's going to say no. You could just become part of the team there very easily. It's the type of feeling that I've had in Brazil when I was there, people are so welcoming, and it's so easy to gel in the crowd there, regardless of how you look and your dress and everything, or how educated you are. You could always be very much at home there. So I think, on the whole, if I say it as a package, Pakistan, I genuinely believe, is a wonderful place to visit. and not a very expensive place to visit as well. The cost of living index in some of the Pakistani cities is, it's one of the lowest in the world. So it's very, your buck really has a much bigger bang there, so to speak. Your money really takes you much farther there than most places in the world. So I'd invite you all to visit Pakistan, like for tourism or for business or for sort of, for making friends there. And I can tell you that you would not be disappointed. Rather, you would all be fascinated by what you see there in Pakistan. And you'd be, best of all, you'd be welcome there in Pakistan. I'll end my kind of, like remarks on this note because I want this to become more of an interactive dialogue here rather than a monologue. So
So maybe if someone has questions for Ambassador Jauhar Saleem, it's the right moment to ask them. Yeah.
Ambassador, my name is Mohammed Khan, and I'm from Pakistan. So I'm from the south of Pakistan, from Sindh.
Oh, wonderful.
I would like you to brief them about the security situation.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of tourists from my classmates here
Uh-huh.
would like to visit Pakistan, but they are really worried about the security.
Oh, okay.
I would like to tell you about the efforts that our military has carried in the recent time. It is really safe to visit Pakistan right now.
Yeah.
I would like to brief you about it.
Wonderful, Mr. Om Prakash. And, and it's great to have you here. In Pakistan, we have many religions, like we have Muslims there, but we also have our Hindu, country fellows there, and we have Christians there, and, like we have Sikhs there and Buddhists there. Like I said, we had a bad patch, and that is what actually sort of, like diminished the flow of tourism to Pakistan starting from the late 70s, like I said, because of the Russian invasion of Afghanistan and the ensuing sort of violence in our region. But in the last few years, like in Pakistan, we have been able to cleanse the country of the terrorists, I mean, that doesn't mean that, like it can't be 0%, because it's not 0% anywhere in the world. As we all know, there was a terrorist attack in Berlin. There was in Paris. They were in Brussels. They were in the US, everywhere in Europe, like in Manchester, in London. It could happen anywhere, one-off incident, of course, because unfortunately we are in the era of global terrorism. But having said that, in Pakistani cities, for many years now, like especially if you talk about very recent years, they're very safe. The big cities, even anywhere in Pakistan, we have seen a meteoric rise in tourism. In Pakistan now, sort of literally, I would say about 500% rise in tourism in the last few years. And touch wood, there have been no incidents against the tourists in Pakistan. These cities are very secure. Most places, 95% of the places in Pakistan are most secure. Close to the border with Afghanistan, there were some problems. Maybe there's still some sort of, like remnants. But nobody goes there for tourism, because that is on the border with Afghanistan. I mean, unless you want to be, somebody wants to join the Taliban, like I wouldn't advise them to go there on a lighter note. So Pakistan is very secure, as secure as probably any other country in the world today. And I have to share something very interesting here. When I was studying in the US, and I often quote that, in the 80s and then the 90s, and then I was teaching there in the 2000s, I found it much more insecure than Pakistan, even at the height of those years when we had problems in Pakistan because of the terrorists. Literally, in the 80s, Philadelphia, where I lived, I mean, when I would venture out, and I went to an Ivy League university, it was not really like, a university kind of, where you wouldn't really want to go. But you would venture just outside the university, and it was literally a war zone, in the night. War zone in the sense that there would be literally like, even the beggars there the way they would ask you money would really frighten you, seriously. I mean, and there would be always muggings there and everything. It was so insecure that Philadelphia and Washington had the highest homicide rates in the world in those years. We had a McDonald's close to where I lived, and I used to live in the university dorms. And every second weekend there used to be a murder there or somebody, some firing there or something, so bad. Now my point here is, in Washington, there were parts of Washington you couldn't even go now. It has all changed. America has become much, much safer now, and I'm very happy, because a lot of my extended family lives in the US, they are US citizens. But the point is that you see, it's all about perceptions. I mean, I can tell you that there's still, in my view, there's more street crime in Berlin than in Lahore, or in Frankfurt than in Lahore, even now. You're probably more secure in Lahore today, than you have in Frankfurt, because I've seen many more sort of, and okay, Germany has a problem. I recently think there was in the newspapers that German government has decided to have a crackdown against these criminals, these petty criminals, and the article said that many of them come from East Europe. They have mafias here. They operate in everything. They make money, and then if there's police, whenever police tries to get involved, they just disappear from the country because it's open borders. London, as you know, so much stabbings going on there. There's a problem. I have family living there as well, and a lot of those cities. But when tourists go from one city to another, even Paris, for instance, or New York, how dangerous some parts of New York are. And it's much, much better, by the way. The New York that I've seen in the early 80s, you can't even imagine. Literally there were places like Harlem and Bronx, and Queens, Astoria, where in the evening, in the night, you couldn't even dare to go there, literally. But even then, they had all those the tourism, the students from all over the world came there and everything. Because humans humans are very adaptable. But what I've seen is that for countries like Pakistan and even perhaps to a lesser degree India and other countries as well, the challenge is of perceptions created by the international media. I mean, some people, if they have to visit Pakistan, they ask, is it safe? And I tell them it's as safe as here, basically. And that is the fact, for tourists. We did not have any incidents relating to tourists, in the last many years, in terms of any, you see. So the thing is that, on the other hand, as we all know, you go to Brazil, it's such a fascinating country. But there are parts of Sao Paulo and parts of Rio de Janeiro, which is such a wonderful city, by the way, that you have to be extremely careful, or there will be some incident. So the thing is but it's very important to have this context, because no place in the world is absolutely secure, But I think Pakistan is as secure as most places in Europe now, presently.
And there's some more questions, yes?
Yes.
My name is Murtaza, and I'm from Afghanistan. I also live in a province which is really close to the Jauhar city in Punjab province. Since you mentioned the Madi and Kalam, these places of Pakistan, they're really nice places. I've been there for many times, and even I lived in Pakistan for a couple of years. So I'm studying here my master's, and I have Indian friends. Always, I'm influencing them.
Do you have some Pakistani friends as well?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Indian and Pakistan, but the questions comes to related to the Indian, because my Indian friends and colleagues, they are here and studying, and I influence them many times to come. Let's go to Mari, Kalam, Natya Gali, which is really nice places to visit for the tourists. How do Pakistan treat Indian tourists?
No, we treat them very well, I mean, to say the least. We treat them better than how they treat us, Okay, no, that was on a lighter note. But on a serious note, we treat them very well. I can tell you one incident which I saw personally. A few years back, in Lahore, my hometown, how far it is from India? Actually, the distance between Lahore and India is not even 1 kilometer because it's on the border. there was a cricket match, and there were thousands of Indians who had come to watch that cricket match, India-Pakistan cricket match in Lahore, and I was there. And Pakistan was winning that match, you know. But then in the last few overs, Dhoni, you know, the captain, he used to be the captain, and he started hitting, and there was this, I think, Yashraj as well. And the match slipped out of Pakistan's hands, you know. And so Indian spectators, I was sitting in a place where there were mostly Indian spectators sitting, you know. We had given them some sort of, you know, nice galleries. And a couple of them, you know, when they started losing the match, Pakistan started losing the match, they got a little worried because it was a big stadium, 30,000, 40,000 people there. And they asked me, oh, you know, so would it be safe for us now if Pakistan loses the match? Because they remembered that in one World Cup which was held in India, when India was losing a match, you know, the crowd just went totally, you know, like, you know, they started putting fires and everything, you know, like there was a lot of disturbance. I said, don't worry. And you know, surprise, surprise, what happened? As in the last 10 overs, when India was winning, all the Pakistanis started cheering the Indian team. And they were so surprised. And then they told me that we have been to some of the markets in Lahore, and people don't charge us money for small things. They say, no, you're a guest from India, you know. I used to see this goodwill in India as well. Many, many years back, I traveled to India, you know. My family they came from Amritsar before partition. So we have, you know, roots there as well. But now, when Pakistanis go to India, there's less of that goodwill for certain reason. But in Pakistan, it's still there. You know, seriously, they would be amazed. In fact, you know, when Imran Khan, the new prime minister, he got inaugurated, the Indian cricket star Sidhu came to Pakistan. And when he's a Sikh, when he went back, he had so much praise for the way he was treated and everything. And before that, Indian movie stars, whenever they come to Pakistan as well, and still a lot of Indians visit Pakistan, by the way. So not only they'd be very safe, they would be very welcomed there, you know, like, you know, they'll be pleasantly surprised to see how, sort of, you know, the feelings of goodwill. Because see, the relations between the two countries, you know, there are the fluctuations and everything. But the problem, you know, like, it's not really, these are political issues. It's not really, people are not really enemies or anything. When I was studying in the US, I had some very close Indian friends. Still, Indians and Pakistanis, as you know, in Dubai and many other places, they get along well. And that's the way it should be. And that is what we call the cultural diplomacy as well. The cultural diplomacy includes that segment of people-to-people contact. And we would be very keen to promote that. You know?
Do you have any more questions? I guess not. So thank you a lot for your speech.
Oh, thank you again. It was wonderful.